Hello everyone, Kurt here, and welcome to a response video from a viewer's question. Recently there was a question that I had from a viewer that had posed the question like, what is the appropriate length of the sword for, like, technique-wise, and the functionality, like if you're trying to use Fiore's Armizare. And I responded back, and one thing that's very hard about text is that I don't feel like I can ever convey everything that I want succinctly. So I usually like to do videos so people can hear what I'm saying. So that's what the intended purpose of this right here is. The answer to that question, eventually what's a good sword length for the ones that are good for practicing Fiore's Armizare? My answer is simple, and we don't know. What we do know is that essentially we have images that are depicted within the Getty of a man bearing a sword of an estimated length, and we don't know how big or small that sword actually is or is not, and that essentially, in my opinion, it doesn't matter. And the reason why I say it doesn't matter is because we have cue context within the sword section where Fiore is, I believe, giving pretty blanket statement advice in regards to swords in general. One of them is about the basic concept of the person who has the longer sword is going to hit first. He talks about two specific guards in the sword in two hand section of tutto porte ferro and mezzo porte ferro, and how one is good for a longer sword, whereas the other one is having a shorter sword of good quality. Does he mean in this case right here, is he saying that the sword is elongated, or is he talking about the physical length? The answer is, we don't know. And I take those cue contexts right there, but as an important piece, because if you go back to the very beginning, and I'm using Greg Maley and Tom Leone's translation of the Getty, which is the Flowers of Battle Volume 1. And I'm on page 181, and I'm in the paragraph second to the bottom on the right side. And from the manuscript, the reason why I say this paragraph changed everything for me when it came down to Fiore's Armizare. Because at the end of the day here, it doesn't matter what's in your hand, because you may not have the same sword in your hand. And that's a part right there that is important to understand about the concept of arms when it comes down to these things. So what it says right here, and again, this is what I tell my students, and that I believe is a core foundation of what Fiore is trying to tell us in this manuscript, or who's trying to tell whoever he was commissioned to send this to, is that when you engage in Armizare, you must assess whether your opponent is stronger or bigger than you, and whether he is much younger or older. You also need to take note of whether he places himself in any of the guards of Armizare. Be sure to pay attention to all these things, and whether you are stronger or weaker. Use the grapples that arise from the binds, and be sure to know how to defend against those which the opponent uses against you. Now, this right here is, again, my philosophy is that, Fiore talks about Armizare in this situation, but for me, Armizare is the totality of Armizare, because all Armizare is weaponized or combat multiplied Armizare. Because essentially you're still utilizing the virtues of Armizare, you're still looking for the weak points, and depending upon whether they're armored or not, it all boils down to wrestling. And that essentially in this case right here, the reason why it does is because we're not going to stop after engagement. It's not like, I hit this person, score a point, go back to the other section. That's a modern sport context. And I believe that it has, that's an important thing to understand here, is because essentially why is Armizare a big part of all of this right here? And why do we see that mostly throughout the manuscript? In my opinion, it's because once you've struck somebody, it's going to have an effect, and you have to ride out that storm or get away or do other things in that fight. It's not a fencing manual, it's a combatives one, and I think that's a big part right here that speaks to me. So while I go into that right there, the reason why I think that is so important to first and foremost comment on is because what is the appropriate length of sword for practicing Fiore's Armizare? I believe that Maestro would probably look at you in this case and time right here. And again, remember, these manuscripts, they're not written for us. They're made for people that he was asked to write it for or have it commissioned for or whatever. And we don't understand necessarily, did he make it so that they can become better fighters? So that their retinues might be better, like, service people for them? Or is this a commemorative piece that some really well-to-do noble person wanted to put on the bookshelf as they see? I have the Secrets of the Art of Arms up there. Because every person up there of noble class, of those that are supposed to fight, should have a book on these things. We don't know. The reason why I would say this right here is that if you were trying to find out what sword length is beneficial for you, my answer is this. Again, like I said, the length of the sword, I think what Fiore would have done is he would have looked at you, he would have done exactly this right here. As I've stated in a previous video about what makes a Maestro, and I'll link it in the description here below, I believe, Hans Talhofer also talks about a similar concept, but however, not about fighting another person, about how to train somebody and how to look at them. Are they good of wind and stout, or all these other things right here. And he's talking about looking at the person and teaching them in accordance to their structure and not your structure, which is an important thing to remember with this. So the reason why this is important is because I'm sure if you were in this period of time and you had your sword of preference or the sword that you had or whatever, Fiore might look at that and he might not prescribe the totality of this manuscript to you. He might prescribe small things to you to use. And that's a big important here to make sure that you understand, is that essentially this manuscript right here, one of the things about these manuscripts right here about that Fiore puts out there, I do not believe for a single second is a how-to or a way of fighting somebody. Oftentimes, I think later manuscripts really focus in on that, but Fiore is really just giving the full breadth catalog, and he is removing the stops about what to do. So if you're having different lengths of swords of this right here, it really boils down to, what are you able to do? Are you comfortably able to sword in one hand this thing? If the answer is yes, then this sword might be, then sword in one hand plays might be applicable. If the answer is no, and you find yourself perhaps struggling to maintain or control the sword in those positions, then that sword is not for you to use a sword in one hand play. And I'm not talking about control against the opponent, I'm talking about control for yourself. Because if you lose the sword in your hand, that's a bigger problem, especially if you're talking about the concept of the martial art. So I just want to take a second here with that right there, because again, that first portion is a huge piece of context that I believe is very important for us to understand when it comes down to what's the sword length. And ultimately, I want to talk a little bit right here. I'm going to put a picture up here. This is a bunch of the swords that I use and that I am very, very die-hard with. And you can see from left to right, they're all different shapes and sizes. Now, one of them you can tell right there has got rings on it, and that is the Federschwert. That is a much later period concept as far as rings go. That was one of original sword that I started to fight with when I first got into historical European martial arts, and have since just used it basically as a training target ever since I started to look at things that, as far as like, what is the context of the sword that I'm using? What is the equipment that I'm trying to use? You may have also seen that too, that the swords become smaller and smaller, and they also become more, I have a type. I like curved cross guards. There's one in there, which is the Albion Fiore, which has got a disc pommel, which I also really like. And I have another fetter that's like that for when I was still doing fetter sparring. I have to leave it here, again, looking at size differences right here, as far as this, so this is that one, the shorter one right here that's got a pommel. And this is a custom that I had built for me by Regenier. And this is actually the one right here that I was talking about being at a cutting tournament. And someone said, why do you have a side sword in a longsword competition? Which I thought was a very interesting question. And I put this up next to the Albion Mercenary, which I was using cutting later on. They said, that's interesting. Wow. And this is why I was saying that a longer sword doesn't mean it's a long sword. It just means it's a longer bladed sword. This right here, this type of sword right here, is very, very, in my opinion, quick. It's able to make crossings. It suffers in areas that I could really benefit from, like having reach, but it really works within the structure of my body. And because of that, it makes it so that the plays of Fiore are available to me. Using the ring sword, which I was talking about before, this is longer, And in this case right here, this type of sword, it does not lend itself very well at all to the sword in one hand plays, but it does lend itself to half swording concepts a lot better because I have the reach and I have a little bit more space in what to do with the sword. So those are both fetters, which were sparring devices for me for a long time, that have since basically become training pieces for weight, and body postures right here, and also sword draws out of scabbards. This is, here's the other thing about this right here to talk about as far as what's the appropriate length sword. This is a 1-to-1 ratio from Black Fencer of, it's not a sharp, it's a rabatta tip, of the Albion Mercenary, which is a big favorite of mine. This is a sword that I would be very comfortable to swing at somebody with one hand. Now, when I say comfortable, I don't mean like I would feel good about what would happen to them, because you can tell how narrow this is right here. I'm saying that this is a type of sword that in my hand, to my strength, to my joint health and everything else, this is a sword that lends itself very, very well to being handled in a variety of different ways because it matches up what's necessary for my strength, my ability, and my understanding. So I say all this here because, again, what's the appropriate length sword? The answer, we don't know. And I don't think it's fair for us to hold ourselves hostage to, you want to have a sword that's this or this or this or this. Now, one thing I am trying to do right now, and I'm nowhere near on this, and I've been talking about this for years, is that essentially a big part right here that makes a lot of this make sense is that, a person that has got a big, long sword, they can do what they want with it. But there are consequences to having a sword that is too much sword for you. I don't have the answer as far as for what is too much sword. And historically, I don't think they really cared, because it's kind of like having the longer reach of something right here is a little bit, you feel a little bit safer with it on you. It's, especially when you start talking about lengths of blades. A part right here that I think might be beneficial for you is to ask yourself this: what is your style of fight? And I will tell you right now that essentially, based on your style of fight, that is the length of sword that benefits you. Now, one thing I will say too is that for me, I have spent great expense in learning this practice of arms, and not everyone is always able to do that. A way to find out what is a better length for you is wooden swords, wasters. Find things that are easy, where you can find half swording capabilities, where you find single sword capabilities, and to be able to flow out of that as you see fit. Please keep in mind that it's about your style. And that's one of the things I actually like about Fiore, is because he's not teaching plays. I don't believe so. And let me rephrase that. It's not that he's not teaching plays. Each one of those sequences right there is a play of something that teaches a concept. But unlike the Lichtenauer traditions and also the later Bolognese traditions where it talks about doing this to this to this, this, Fiore just gives a crossing and possibilities off of that. That's it. And I think the reason why he did that is because he did not want to train people into a system which puts you forward to just do the routine, and expect somebody to respond when they may not respond that way. Fiore's manuscript is a catalog of pain, also a catalog of crossing, and a catalog of adaptability. And if you're trying to do Fiore's works, the question really is if you're trying to get the breadth of everything out there, well, it's important to have longer swords, shorter swords, fight with just a dagger, fight with an arming sword. Fiore doesn't call it a one-handed sword. Well, some translations see it that way. I certainly don't. I think he's saying a sword in one hand. Some of the latest labs I've done recently, I've had an arming sword and I can easily hold that with two hands. So what's that about? So again, the length of the sword really boils down to what you want to do and what your goals are. Because I think a big part of this right here that is important to also look at yourself at this is, since I've really gone down the sharp sim path, a lot of my art has changed. And since I've really got into Fiore, I don't always aim for the top of people's heads anymore. I aim for napes of necks, which is a spot right there when it comes down to certain practices is very dangerous to hit somebody there. But that's why we utilize different means of being able to strike differently, is because the reality is Fiore's not trying to touch to the top of the head. he's trying to strike to the certain areas right here, which ends somebody and takes away time from them. And again, of course, if you're talking about playing in the modern sport, the tournament, you got to adhere to those rules. No one's actually trying to do this for real, and they shouldn't be. And there are ways that the tournament absolutely helps us understand how to build off of that. And for me, in my practice, for my goals of what I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to replicate as close as possible to this so that I might be able to bring that experience to other people out there for the purpose of behaviorism, self-awareness, and experimental archaeology. So a lot of what I do as far as Fiore's works absolutely is effective. But the goal of it is to understand every bit of it, to understand what it meant to be a person of this time that would have practiced this. And that means I have to understand how to use a sword that is long, that is short, that is optimal for one-handed use, and optimal for two-handed use. And within those spaces right there, see how they all work together in conjunction to in and out of armor. So what is the right size for you? The answer is, it's up to you, dear viewer. At the end of the day, no one has the right to tell you what's right or wrong. However, it is a responsibility for you and anyone who practices this to be able to perform the things out there without hurting your training partners. If the sword is too much, and I said that before, again, in a historical time, if the sword is too much and it really gets away from you and it really cuts or hurts the person across, well, in that period of time, they might have called that a really good sword. But for today, where we're trying to practice, that's something right there that brings you out of control. And if you're utilizing techniques and devices of different length, it's best to understand what you're facing with and how you work with your own body, and perhaps the advice that Fiore gives us is optimal. So that's concluded for this video. Again, I wanted to share my thoughts on this because this is something that's actually been coming up a lot more. And I'm actually trying to find ways to measure as far as like what's an optimal length for people. I work with people of all different heights, shapes, and sizes out there. And some people having a sword that goes up to their head is not optimal for doing things and actually lose a lot of the grappling situations in sword work when the sword is taken away out of play. And now you have too much blade that you can't do anything with it. So I'm doing observations and discussions with people to try to find out what is good for people. And is there a way to systemize that for people? We won't know. But I want to put this out there because, again, I love the question, and I'd like to give, for really strong questions like that, I really love to be able to give back as much as possible. I hope this gives insight to you, and I hope it helps and anyone else out there that may be wondering the same thing. Remember, your practice of Armizare is your own. But you have to understand and have the honest question of what you're using it for. The modern day context is not the historical context. And yet, combat and competition both share the same corrosive thread of edging somebody out to win, which is something that is universal in the art of arms. So, let me know what your thoughts are out there. Please be safe out there, everybody. Like I said before, just want to make sure this is understood and taken the right way. And as always, until I see you, please be safe, train well, and fight on. I'll see you all soon.